consent practices. So, hey everybody, it is the Thrive PhD coaching call. I'm super excited to be here with everybody, whether that is in real time or whenever you encounter this recording in the future. It's kind of fun to think that it goes on. So I had a question come in, but there's also a lot of times to talk about things. Um, for the first time, I feel like we're in a little bit of a stable place, although I know that it definitely shifts back and forth depending on your personal situation. Um, at least I locally felt in control for like a palm or two today, so that felt good. So um, this is just a reminder, though, that the we're all in different places. So a blanket statement that sometimes I'm going to throw out suggestions, I'm going to try things. You are your own best expert. So if it works for you, that's awesome. If it doesn't work for you and you need something else, let me know. But always, 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 I am not a god. I'm a mortal who's right there down in the muck, just like everybody. So please know that just because I say that this is something that should work or could work doesn't mean that you're wrong or bad or doing it wrong if it doesn't work. It just means that everybody's situation is different, and so many of these tools, all of these tools work under certain conditions, and if those conditions aren't being met, then the tool's not going to work. It's sort of like trying to screw with a hammer. Like it's not the right tool for the job. So with all of that being said, let's get into it. Okay, the first question it came through was this one. Oh, the person wants me to talk. Yeah, I know that some people have different approaches about rewards. Do you have some thoughts on different strategies for rewarding oneself after work? I don't mean types of rewards, chocolate, a purchase, a long walk, or whatever, but how and when to use the reward system. Um, yeah, so maybe when they work, they get a reward, or they show up and they get the reward, or first you get the reward and then you work for it. Um, yeah, so somebody had asked a question like this before, and they're referencing that about how food rewards don't work for her, because if she wants the chocolate, she's going to eat it anyway. Chips in my whole life have never been an effective reward, because if I want chips, I eat chips. It's basically my life motto. Want chip, eat chip. See chip, eat chip. Love chips. But it is a really good question, because rewards are really tricky. I like to think about them less as even rewards. I'm coming to sort of hate the word reward. It's a good shorthand for what I mean, which is like something that you exchange with yourself in the economy of work and resources internally. And I think that for a lot of people, that means a reward. It's I always the metaphor that goes into my brain all the time is, if you complete the year for the summer of reading, you could go to Pizza Hut for free. I don't know if that was in everybody's town or in every summer, but in my town, if you finished this like reading bingo card over the summer, you got to go to Pizza Hut. My parents hated Pizza Hut, and it was the only way I got to go. So I was very invested all summer in reading so that I could go to Pizza Hut. And it kind of instilled, and I think lots of us are growing up and are in education systems that from the jump are saying, if you focus now, you can go to recess. If you, if you get all of these things, you get a sticker. If you use the potty, you get a sticker. And it's because we as humans need some motivation. And intrinsic motivation is great if you have it. That sense that like, I'm just going to get up and do this because I want to get up and do this. But I don't know if you've ever been a human. Sometimes it's just not enough. Like sometimes you need a reward. Spoiler alert, there is a curriculum where I kind of talk in a lot more detail about the reward cycle and what happens. But basically, the big pitfall with rewards that I see happening all the time is that people say, okay, when I do X, finish this chapter, turn it in, defend my dissertation, kind of whatever the big goal is, or even small goals, if I get through everything today, I get to work out, or once I do everything today, I'm going to go to the grocery store as a reward. The problem comes when you remove things because you don't get to the goal or the milestone that you wanted to. And sometimes it's not a huge deal. Like if you say, if I, write 100 words today, I get a couple Skittles. If you don't get the Skittles, it's not going to be the end of the world. But if you set up something like a workout as a reward at the end of the day, and you, for a bunch of foreseeable and unforeseeable reasons, you don't get there, and then you say, okay, well, do I get to work out now? Because you set up a system where like, if you don't do the writing, you don't get to work out. And for a lot of us, me very much so, the workout is an important part to the brain and the body staying, on this plane and not in a fog of anger and hatred and everything else. So it's not great to tie things to it. But even in a smaller way, if you say you get to only eat Skittles when you write and you haven't been writing, well, if the Skittles were meant to get you to the desk in the first place, but now you just are associating the activity that you're trying to reward with the absence of that reward. So we're withholding, and we start to believe and associate the act of writing or trying to write with the failure instead of the positive. So the question is, what are the strategies that I find most helpful? And the first one, I think, is to think about what you're using as a reward and make sure that it's not a life-sustaining or a life-enriching thing that you should or would want to do in any circumstance, and that you're holding it over yourself like a weapon. So if you're saying, I don't get to go to sleep until I grade all of these papers, unless it's finals and then all rules are off. But like if you say, I'm not going to go to bed until this is done, and then, it's 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock and you're totally not focused, but you're holding sleep over yourself as a threat, that's not great. Workouts are a really good example and a really common one that I see, and I totally fall prey to it too, where I'm like, oh, I didn't get enough today, I'm just going to stay at my desk a couple of hours and skip the workout. It never works. It never, almost invariably, working out either gives me the energy or gives me the clarity or helps me kind of take a break and reset, instead of just spending an extra 2 hours at 20% power, getting more and more frustrated, and then emerging from that fog, having not done the thing that makes me feel better and also having not finished what I wanted to. It's a lose-lose. So being careful with what you're using as rewards. I know for a lot of people, food is a tricky reward. It doesn't work well for me, which is why my rule is see a chip, eat a chip. It just, my brain, my history with eating disorders, it's never great for me to use food as a reward. So I like to think about it as, what things can I use to infuse a positive pleasure system into my work, so that at any point during the process, at the beginning, in the middle, or the end, there's something that I associate with pleasure that I can use to help power me up, power me through, or feel good and celebrate at the end. That will help me associate the act of working with good feelings, as opposed to dread and fear and anxiety. I'm never going to be perfect at keeping the dread and fear and anxiety off, and I will be very honest. So one of the ways that I start off my work sessions with a little bit of pleasure is I have a bunch of pens, and I love pens. I love colored pens. I love just obscenely colored things. And is the power of any singular colored pen enough to get me into work every single day, no matter what? No, they're pens. But I know that when I start working, I get to use the pens I like, I get to design my to-do list in the way that I like to, and maybe get to color in some things. It's a little bit of a hit, instead of being like, I'm a robot and I have to be there at my computer. I like to very much associate different senses with parts of working. So I will, at various different times, usually not all at once, maybe light a candle that smells good, that I only get to use when I'm writing. Or I have a special tea that I've used off and on. Sometimes I sometimes will listen to very specific playlists or albums to associate them with certain things, but I try and infuse non-distracting pleasures into the work cycle. And it could be that maybe one of your rewards are that you set up your desk in a way that doesn't make your back scream in agony. Or maybe it's, in a different world where we get to work at a coffee shop that like once a week you go and you get to work in a coffee shop with your favorite latte. Infusing pleasure throughout. And then at the end, being very careful. So, does it give you a lot of satisfaction to just check everything off at the end of the day? Then that's a huge reward. But for me, the biggest reward at the end is the signal that I've stopped working and are moving on to whatever's coming next. So, the question is like, when do you use them and when do you not use them? You always get to use them. There's no problem. Your pens aren't going to make you a validation craving robot that will only work with new pens. The pens just make it a little bit more fun. So thinking about it as, what can I use to associate this with pleasure so that I'm not in a system where I have ransomed everything that makes me feel good and tied it to this very ebb and flow process of writing. The other thing that I will say about rewards is that they do benefit, in my experience, from shaking it up a little bit. So, like sometimes I know that it's just, some of it is just like memory and repetition, but sometimes I'm really into my colored pens, and other times I'm like really getting a buzz from my planner. Sometimes it's like a really good water bottle that I love to use and I only use when I'm working. Not being afraid to shake it up. We all get used to stuff. Even the palm timer sound, I realized I've completely numbed it out at this point. I've been using Palm so much in the last 7 weeks or so that I don't even associate the palm timer noise with anything specific anymore. So I changed it to a new noise. And now it's kind of like, ooh, cool, new noise. But figuring out ways to make it so that you don't dread the process. Because the less dread you have, the easier it is to show up regularly. And the easier it is to show up regularly, and the less fear that you have that if this one writing session or this one poem doesn't go well, then you never get to do anything fun again. The less of that fear that you have, the easier it is to get used to, okay, well, that poem didn't work, I'm going to try again. I like to think about it as infusing as much pleasure as possible and reducing the dread so that I'm not afraid to restart if it's not working, to rest if I need to cut it short and switch to another task, to take the value judgments out of all of that stuff and just make it normal tools that I use to surf the wave of my focus at any given time. Yeah. So that was a long, rambling answer about rewards. The too long don't read of it is um, thinking about it less as, more as a positive pleasure system and less as um, building a gate between you and everything that brings you joy in your life, and only allowing yourself to pass through that gate when you've met the highest of standards. Because that just means that all of your fun sits on the other side of the gate. And if you say that you're only going to have fun when you finish the dissertation, it's going to be it's already a long, hard slog. Let's not make it any worse. So, okay. Any other questions or things that are coming up? Um, um, okay. Well, the thing that I have noticed in the um, kind of themes. So one of the great pleasures of being me, in addition to being in a community with cool people just like you, is that I get to kind of see the trends. in the different groups. And one of the things that's really been coming up this week is feeling stuck in this liminal space. And this is something that's come up in my conversations with other coaches, it's come up with my conversations with friends. Um, Feeling caught in a liminal space. And I don't think this is pandemic specific, but it certainly seems to be happening to more of us more regularly right now. But the middle, yeah, um, yes, the middle zone between the initial kind of crisis triage, and of course, this is with the large caveat that lots of us are um, trying to work with kids that's still at home, and that have had school canceled for the rest of the year, and you maybe have 20 minutes to yourself if on a good day, if you pretend to take a shower and lock yourself in the bathroom. Um, or some of us are dealing with active care situations. Some of us are dealing, with a dissertation that needs to be defended because funding runs out on May 1 and you really just have to get it done. So with the forever huge caveat that not all of us have settled into a place where it feels a little bit more stable, but that there's a certain clarity in the triage stage. That like if you have somebody who's really sick, you're taking care of them, or you have a 4-year-old that like really needs you to feed at lunch, or else it's not going to make it to dinner. There's a certain clarity in what needs to be able to get done right then. And of course, there are the thoughts that are like, you should be writing or you should be thinking, and they are this sort of background hum that you can maybe turn the volume down for a second, but it's always going to be that hum about not being able to do enough. But there's a certain clarity that when faced between this sort of nebulous, I need to work on my dissertation, and this person actively needs my care, most brains are going to pick most of the time the active care. But in this sort of middle zone where there is stability for now, really big questions in the future, or kind of, I know what this week is going to look like, but after that, I have no clue. People who are saying, what happens in the fall for partial, what happens in the summer, I'm still curious. Like, will I ever get the library? There's so much sort of space and flexibility and instability that it's really hard to be able to say, okay, I'm not in an active crisis. I have a roof over my head. I have food enough to eat. The people who I'm responsible for most directly are here. However, I still don't feel like I can focus 100%. And does that mean these are a list of thoughts that I've had for myself in the last week. Am I taking advantage of the situation to indulge in internal laziness that I've never been able to get rid of, no matter how hard I've tried? Am I making a bigger deal out of my own brain fog and I should be able to just push through it? Everybody else is pushing through it, or this is week 7, you should be used to this by now. Or, what can you do to make sure that those 25 minutes that feel awesome stretch for 7 hours, because 25 to 7 hours is a rational amount of time to be able to expand in one day if you just try hard enough. I think that there is a lot more space, ironically, for some of those monsters to send us invitations that, and that's hard. So the invitation to feel guilty when we're not getting any work done, I like to think of it as, yeah, yes, everybody's saying they're thinking about Homer just sinking back into the bushes. Yeah, like it's when you realize that the initial fires are out, and now you're looking at the next indefinite period of time where you probably can't do all the work that you were thinking of, but you can't do no work. How do you decide every day what's enough? How do you draw the line and say, okay, this is what is enough for today. I'm going to let myself quit. Or I'm going to take a rest, or I'm going to, I haven't had a proper day off in a long time. Like, I haven't felt rested in a while. And I think that's true for a lot of people. So I don't have a great answer for that. I don't have a great answer for the managing the, this is as much as I could do today. and that's going to have to be enough. But some of the things that have been helping me are picking three important things every day and focusing on those first, so that if in case everything goes off the rails at 2 o'clock, which it sometimes does, at least I used some time to get the most important things at least move forward. So the three things lens has been really helping me. The ABC list, which I've talked about a lot, but I think has been really useful for me in the last couple of weeks, where I have an A column where these things are like the highest priority. And I try to use the definition of it will be a large problem immediately that impacts me and or other people if I don't do it today. That's what gets to go in the A column. So I always have A column creep, where it feels very important to start of the day, Katie, to get everything done. And of course, everything will have huge consequences if I don't finish it. I do find that lunchtime Katie is a lot more realistic, and she 100% moves things from the A column into the B column. And the B column is, it would be really great to get this stuff done today, but if it doesn't, the world's not going to end. And then the C list are things that I know I need to do, but I'm giving myself a pass right here, right now, to not touch them if I need to. I just am acknowledging that the chances that I will get to the things on the C column are low, and I'm just pre-absolving myself of that guilt. So this is my A column today, and it was really like, this is mine. I use it. She eats the dog food, as they say in, yeah. She eats the dog. That's what they say in tech. When you use your own products, you eat the dog food. I have a husband in tech, and it's wild. They make up stuff all the time. But yes, I have to both evaluate what I put in the A column, and then make sure that if it's actually an A, I focus on it. But what I like about seeing it in the three columns is that if I am at my desk and everything in the A column seems like it would cause me huge anxiety to do it, at least I have things on the B that I can pivot. You know, it'd be great if I got this done today. And I guess if the choice is between doing nothing or, you know, doing something that's actively not going to move me forward, I'd rather have a B task than nothing at all. And sometimes I start with the C, because I'm like, you know what, I don't really need to do this and I'm not supposed to do it today, but I would really enjoy shopping from a I would really enjoy shopping for a laptop stand, and I will do that instead of, you know, paying bills. So the question is how to keep from putting everything in the dissertation related in the C column. Yes, part of this liminal space is that the urgency doesn't seem to be there. There's a couple of ways, and one is to put some sort of like mini deadlines on it, but then I think some of it is to wrap your mind around the idea that there's a difference between, and only you can answer this question. Am I putting it in the C column because I don't have the resources to do it, and that's why I need to give myself permission to not do it today? Is there something that I need that would move it into the B column? So say you're waiting for your data to come in, and you could in theory start, writing up results, but you don't have everything you need. And so if there's something that you're missing, then it goes in the B column. But if you have everything that you need to do that task, then I would say experiment with putting it in the B. So Katie is saying, I found that having a specific timeline, so working back from the end date and having targets help to prioritize it. So putting a sort of interim due date on it. Yes, I also like, and at different phases of my life, I've used really effectively 2-week sprints. So I define sprint goals, and I will post, let me make a note because I will 100% forget. But the sprint goals, so sprints are a feature of Agile, which is a project development system, and you do not need to know it. There's a really great book called Agile Faculty or something. It's something. The person who wrote it is named Dr. Rebecca Pope Ruark, and she's cool. You can follow her on Twitter. I know her really well. She's working on a cool new book on academic burnout, which is too close to home for me to contribute, but I love that people did. Anyway, she really recommends sprints And sprints are part of this bigger system called Agile. But the idea is that like you have a 2-week goal and you're committed to it. And I like the 2-week rhythm a lot. It gives me 1 weekend off in between sprints, and then kind of like a flex slush weekend where if I need to do a little work on a Saturday or Sunday, I can, to kind of get to a mid-sprint goal. But the 2-week thing seems to be, and what I like is that it's not on an academic schedule. So like 2 weeks happens, every 2 weeks. And so thinking about, this is what I would love to get done at the end of this 2 weeks, and then saying, okay, how do I break that down? But only picking a couple of things to work on for those 2-week sprints can be really helpful. So instead of saying, okay, in my dissertation C column, there's something huge like methods chapter, thinking about it as, I'd really love to have the results, I'd love to have my data scrubbed, the compilation code written, and the preliminary tests done at the end of these 2 weeks. And then you have some sort of concrete things to start kind of moving forward. But yeah, try sprints. They could work for adding a little bit of that urgency in there. I also like to remember that everything will become urgent eventually, and that working in smaller, sustainable ways in advance of a deadline is its own kind of self-care. And framing it as self-care has been really helpful for me. So thinking about my work as, I am working on this ahead of time and using a little bit of my own internal fire to generate some urgency around this, because it will give me more choices later on in this timeline. And giving myself choices is a kind of self-care. But if you have to turn in a chapter, I wrote an article, and I will post that one too, called like Self-Care Gives You Choices. And I go back and forth about whether or not the concept of self-care is useful or just another capitalistic trap. But I like thinking about self-care as, these are things that I'm doing that will give me choices. So I am sleeping on a more regular schedule so that I have the choice between whether or not, and honestly, this is what it would feel like. So when I'm really, truly exhausted, I will fall asleep at my desk. I will sit down to watch something for 10 minutes and fall asleep on the couch and lose 6 hours. A 2-hour nap will turn into 8. There's all sorts of things. But if I'm sleeping more regularly, I have a choice about whether or not I'm sleeping or not, as opposed to, something happens and my body takes over. But thinking about working in smaller, sustainable chunks as, I'm doing this to help myself have more choices in the future, has been a good way for me to think about that urgency. Okay, do you recommend having different ABC lists for different parts of your life, or is one list for everything better? It really depends. In different seasons of my life, I have had very separate, so when I was a grad student and I had teaching work, dissertation work, and then I worked at the Teaching and Learning Center as a consultant, I kept them all separate because it was too much context switching. But it worked for me because I had certain days in my schedule that were teaching days where I did all the teaching. I had dissertation days, and then I had CRLT where I was sort of bookended into really discrete chunks. So it just helped me stay in those contexts to only have one list open at a time. In other semesters, if I was like, when I was on fellowship, I put everything on that list, because sometimes I wanted to start with life stuff, and sometimes I wanted to start with family stuff, and sometimes I wanted to start with the discs. In general, I lean towards one list that has everything on it, if only because it sends your brain a signal that all of those things, you have to do them and they're all equally valid, as opposed to creating some sort of a hierarchy between, this is my dissertation list and I have to do everything on it, and then I get to do the other stuff. I think having your tools reflect the wholeness of your life can be really useful. Although that one, in my experience, is less universal. I have other people who are like, I will refuse to pollute my personal bullet journal with dissertation work. And I respect that. So I think experimenting with it, but in general, if you're having trouble seeing all of it at once, I would lean towards combining it. And if you're having trouble, yeah. I schedule certain parts for certain in my life and then I stick to that. She uses OmniFocus and then only works at the relevant list. Um, yeah. And then I think that there's certain, if you are going to have separate lists, it becomes more important to then have a pretty predictable schedule so that you know that you're not going to go, for 2 weeks without looking at your dissertation task list, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to go eat some dinner, but it was really great to sort of hang out with everybody today. Just so that you know, all of the coaching calls for the rest of the session are up and they're scheduled in the events calendar. So I can't guarantee that something won't come up in June that I'll need to reschedule, but I'm pretty sure that those will be the ones that stick. So if it's important to you to make these live, then I'm happy to have you have those dates. Very excited. But that's one of the things that somebody suggested it, and I was like, that's a really good idea. I should do that. So please don't hesitate to reach out and are like, I wish this worked like this, or it would really help me if this thing happened. Because normally it's just my own like narrow-minded single person brain. And I am more than happy to adjust if it's reasonable and I can do it. And it almost always is reasonable and I can do it because you are kind people that respect boundaries too. So happy whatever day it is. I'm excited to be there. We still got a rest of the week. It's hump day. If Wednesday is a concept that still has meaning for you, um, if not, happy whatever day. And I will see everybody soon. Bye.